room and one's run. So Samuel, can you check the school's room? Travis, can you check Calvinelli's room? Make sure everyone's back. What's that? Oh, 3 people. Can you tell them to please grab their pencils and come on back? Please grabbing an extra paper over there behind you.
They got a pencil.
Tony, can you grab an extra paper behind you, please? Okay, so we are going to be scientists. So let's put on our scientist goggles. And we're going to do an experiment. So we're going to test something to see if it's true or not true. So we're going to see if these float. So we have this bowl of water here, and I brought some objects, and we're going to see if they float. So with everything, so first, what do? We have to ask a question. So what would be a good question? If we're trying to figure out if something's going to float, what would be a good question to ask? Lucas. What things are we going to use? That's a fantastic question. The great thing about it is they're already here in this desk. They're hidden. But as I pull them out, what would be a good question? Sierra.
Maybe we could ask how will we know if this planet floats or doesn't float?
How will we know if this object floats or doesn't float? That's an excellent question. So that's going to be the question we're going to keep in our mind. So we already have a little background research. We know that if something's really heavy, does it typically float or sink?
Sink.
It sinks. And if it's something light, does it typically float or sink? Float, typically. And then we're going to state our hypothesis. So we're going to state something that we think might happen. So for each object that I pull out, we're going to ask a question and have a hypothesis, and then we're going to test it out. So for each object that I bring out, so right here, tomato. We can write over here, tomato. And we can, what's our prediction? Do we think that this tomato is going to sink or float? With a show of hands, do you think it is going to sink? Raise your hands. With a raise of hands, if you think it is going to float. Okay. So with your prediction, draw a little picture, whether you think, so if this is your, either if you think it's going to sink, draw right there, or if you think it's going to float, have right there. And show me with a thumbs up when you're ready. So let's wait for a few friends. So sink would be good. Here, help me write that down. This would be sink. This would be float. So under the prediction, so what we think is going to happen is our prediction. What we predict is going to happen. What we think might happen. Okay, so are you ready? Let's test it out. Let's be scientists. What's it doing? Is it sinking? So is it touching the ground?
No.
So I would say that's floating. What do you think? Yeah, so it's floating. So draw right here. Did it sink or did it float? So draw a picture of the tomato. Where is it? Is it floating? Or is it sinking? Floating. Let's draw a picture of that. Are you ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Banana. So what do we think? Do we think this banana is kind of, what size is this? Would you say it's small or big? Big, medium, maybe some to small. Do we think it's going to, show me with some hands, do we think it's going to sink? Some think that. Do we think it's going to sink? Some think that. So for anybody that raised their hand for thinks it's going to sink, can I have an idea of why you think it's going to sink? Angel?
Because the weight.
So it might be heavy. That's an excellent, excellent idea. So anybody that thinks it might float, what's an idea? Travis?
It's like a heavy object, and in water, it might float or sink.
That's right. Yeah. Anyone else want to give a guess as to why you think it might, or it might float, I should say? Eva?
Because a banana can weigh like any type of pound. Like it can weigh like heavy. It can weigh like light. A banana can weigh like anything. So I would say it would sink and float.
Okay, well, that's an interesting hypothesis, so let's test it out. So what would be our hypothesis? So for those of you that think that it's going to sink, your hypothesis would be that you think it's going to sink. For those of you that think it's going to float, your hypothesis would be, I think it's going to float. So write or show me in a drawing in your prediction which one you think it is, and then show me with a thumbs up when you're ready so we can test it out. Okay, so we have a few people who are ready to go. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Are we ready, scientists?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's gonna stick.
Oh my goodness, what's it doing?
Floating.
Banana is floating. Oh my goodness.
Both it's sinking and floating.
So it's floating. So I would draw what happened.
Whoa. Now let's do this. Do this thing. First, what do we do? We have to like. I'm confused. I feel like with the
Excellent question. So Trey brought up an excellent point. So he was saying, there's two of these. And sometimes they show two different things. And that's okay. Because as scientists, sometimes you might think something will happen, and then when you test it, the opposite happens. And that's okay. That happens all the time.
Yeah, but how do you know which one you think, what cup is it thinking which one is?
So this one right here's the first one. It says prediction. So pre means before. So it's our idea of what we might think will happen before we test it. Sink or float right here, that's what actually happened. Did it sink or did it float? Did that answer your question, Trey? Does that make a bit more sense? Trey, does that make sense? Is anyone else confused, or does that make sense to everybody? Make sense? Okay, good. Okay, see what else I got back here. A little tree frog. What do we think is going to happen? Do we think it's going to sink or float? So show me with some hands. Who thinks it's going to sink? Who thinks it's going to float? Okay. So draw your prediction. seconds to finish up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, turn.
It's gonna float and go like this, and it's gonna sink it and go like that.
That's an excellent idea. So Tony just thought of an excellent idea. We'll use that for the next one. Thank you. Okay, so are you ready to test it out?
Yes.
I hope this little guy can swim. What about you? 1. It sank. Let's have you gentlemen sit down. So I know it may be a little bit tricky for some of you to see. That's okay. I'm going to lift it up. Stay seated. I'm going to lift this up a little bit so you can see. Same.
On the bottom.